Hello, this is Jolie with Crochet Basics, and in this episode we're making a beginner friendly, this is totally beginner project, for a boho purse, so a granny square boho purse. Alright, so I have an advanced one of these patterns up where we make our yarn and all of that, and we do Tunisian crochet, and we use D-rings and all that, and we line it. So in making that, I started making this to show easier, and I realized I had dueling patterns going on. So I figured, let me make a super beginner friendly. And I'm going to walk you through all the stitches and how we're going to do everything. So with that being said, what you need is a size 4, 100% cotton yarn. Okay, we're going in an H hook, which is a US size H8. It's a 5-point millimeter hook. Scissors, stitch markers, these work great. The plastic safety pins, they work great with the crochet and the knit. You want to have strap adjusters. So most stuff that I use you can get in the sewing section. It's not necessarily meant for crochet items or knit items. It's in the sewing section, and that's that. And you can get stuff online also. Which is, super easy, okay? So these are strap adjusters. They come in different colors and usually about the same size. Sometimes you can get them a little bigger, unless you're ordering custom. Okay, but these work out great. Nylon strap. Easy peasy. We're going to work with a nylon strap this time. It'll make it easy for the handle. And it just makes it easier. It doesn't like stretch or come out of place or anything like that. I order it, these I ordered online, these giant reels of it, these big ones. And they come in different, these are looser. The stitch itself is looser, lighter weight than say this. This is a tighter weave and it's heavier, it's more sturdy. Okay, but you can get them, Drit sells them. You can get them in craft store, I think Walmart or Kmart, whichever one has a crafting section. Has it, I know. Measuring tape, always important when you're working with yarn, just in case your stitches could be off, or, your tension, or, whatever it is. Quilters squares, cotton quilter squares. These are great. They're pre-cut, and they're perfect size for this project. This one is 18 by 21 inches, and it's 100% cotton, and they come in all different colors, and they're pretty inexpensive. They're in the sewing section also, of course. They have all different patterns, tie-dye. I love these little ice cream cones. I think I bought this to make face masks with for COVID and all, but leftovers, of course. All right, what else? Scissor, tape measure, pins, needle and thread for when we are yarn needle, and then needle and thread, regular needle and thread for when we sew the liner. And these I don't normally pin when I'm sewing with yarn. I'm always afraid I'm going to lose the pins in the yarn, but these are great. These big with the bobble heads really work out, and then they have other ones with different colorful heads and stuff like that. Okay, let's see, anything else. And I'm doing it in 2 different colored yarns. So it's 2 panels, a front panel and a back panel. And I'm doing it in you need another color yarn if you're going to do it like me, to make the sides and the bottom of the bag. All right, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So let's get this started. We're super beginner friendly. Now, classic granny square, people have different ways of starting, okay? And that's quite all right. Everybody has their own techniques. So if you do a slip knot or a magic ring, those work perfect. Sometimes people will chain 3 and slip stitch and then crochet into that chain 3 space. Okay, I do a little crossover on my hook, but if you want to start with a slip knot or a magic ring or something, that's fine too. That'll work. Okay, so let's get this started. I'm zoomed in. I'm going to zoom in further for the super beginners. Okay, so however you start, your starting knot, and then you're going to chain 3. So 1, 2, 3. And in this third chain from the hook is where we're going to work, and you're going to work around your tail. Okay, and so don't tighten that loop up, we need that loop. So you're going to do 2 double crochets. So you'll yarn over, you'll go through your loop, you'll yarn over, pull through, you have 3, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, and pull through your last 2. Okay, so we'll do that again. We'll yarn over, go through, yarn over, pull up a loop, you have 3, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And then from here we're going to chain 2, because this is a, you know, classic sized granny square, and, you know, granny stitch either way. All right, so you'll chain 2, 1, 2. On your chaining you want even tension, and you're going to go right back in and do 3 more double crochet in that loop. Okay, alright, so we have 2 clusters made, 2 double crochet clusters, and you're chaining from the very first, your very first chaining, that counts as a stitch. Here and throughout the whole granny square, that counts as a stitch. So we'll chain 2 again, 1, 2. You'll yarn over and work another double crochet cluster. Alright, chain 2, 1, 2, and now we're going to work our last double crochet cluster. Okay, so this is what it looks like so far. So now we're going to chain 2, and in the top of the chain that we first made, you're going to push through and do a slip stitch. And slip stitching is just pulling through. So you pull through. Alright, now you take your tail from where we first started, and you're going to pull that nice and tight, and it's going to close up that loop. So poof, like a magic trick. I love that. Alright, and that's nice too, because when this comes loose, it'll make the piece sometimes look funny, I think. Alright, so from here, we're going to chain again. We're going to chain 2. So 1, 2. And right in this spot that we just went in, you're going to go right back in and do 2 double crochets. Alright, so 2 double crochets right there. Okay, and that keeps the seam of your starting and ending in the same spot. So as long as you go right back into where you did your chaining, it'll keep that seam for the whole length of the piece. Alright, so we're chaining 2, 1, 2, and we're going to skip over this cluster here. We're skipping over that. You're not going to work in any of the clusters as far as this part is concerned. So you'll skip over and go into your chain space here and work a cluster. Alright, so you'll chain 2 and you're going to work another cluster in that same spot. So this is what the corner looks like. That's actually a corner. That's considered a corner. Okay? It's a corner. Alright, but we're going to work this in each one of our chain spaces from the first row. So from here you'll chain 2 and you'll skip over to your next chain space. Alright, and we'll work our first cluster there. You'll chain 2, 1, 2, and you'll work your next cluster in that same spot. Okay, so we have 2 corners made so far. So chain 2, skip over to your chain space here, and work your cluster. Now let's keep going. 2, chain 2, and go right back in and do another cluster. Chain 2, and we're going to work our last cluster for the corner. So you got to remember to chain your last 2, because it will throw the piece off. It'll make it a little wonky, you know, where this corner is missing. All right, and you'll slip stitch and you'll chain 2, 1, 2. And we're going to go right back in, and just to show you all the chaining, you know, when you're working. So now we have more clusters to do here. So now we added in the extra chains, so now we have 4, you know, 4 more clusters to do as we're going around. All right. So whatever kind of, you know, cotton yarn you want to use, really. As long as it's size 4, it'll work out pretty much. Because I've done this in, this is Peaches and Creams or Sugars and Cream. And I've done it in the Barney cotton, and I've done it in, there's another brand of cotton, I don't know the name offhand. But a granny is a granny, and size 4 is size 4. As far as cotton is concerned, size 4 is size 4. Acrylic is another story. All right, but back to this. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit every row, I think. So now we're on row 3. And we're going to go right back in and do our 2 double crochets for our first cluster to work this. Now here you're going to chain 2, and you're going to go into this chain space. And you'll work 3 double crochets. Just 1 cluster. We're not doing a double cluster here. Okay? And you'll chain 2, and you'll move to your next chain space. And on this is a corner, and all the corners are worked with a double cluster. So 2 sets of 3 double crochets in the corner. And if you need, if I'm losing you, you know, pause, rewind the video, rewatch it, okay? Don't think you can't get the hang of it, because for the longest time, I couldn't do a granny square. I was making all types of projects, and granny squares, I just could never, ever get them to come out right. I kid you not. I mean, like, for years, they would always come out lopsided and all this. And I think one day my mom showed me how to do it the proper, and that's when I got it together and finally realized, okay, what I was doing wrong, well, you know. All right, so we did our clusters here in our corner, so you'll chain 2 and move on to your next chain space and do a cluster of 3. 1 cluster. Chain 2, 1, 2, and working the corner again. Move over and work your corner. Chain 2, and go right back in and work another cluster. Okay, that's our corner. So you'll chain 2 again and move over to your next chain space. Chain 2, and then we're going to work our corner here. So we'll work our first cluster. Chain 2. Work your next cluster in the same spot. Chain 2, moving over. Chain 2, and let's finish up our corner here with one cluster, and then the chain and the slip stitch. So 1, 2, 3. Now one thing you have to remember, and this was my biggest mess up with the my biggest mess up, where I couldn't get them to sit right, is that I wasn't going back in the same corner. What I was doing was I would do the chaining and then move on to the next. So each row, my seam of where I started and ended each row would shift over to the next. And it would shift as it, and as it got bigger and bigger, my seam would shift, and it would, I guess the way I was chaining, it would pull tight in a weird way, and the square would never, like, I could use it, but I couldn't really use it for specific projects, So my mom showed me, I remember her showing me actually, that you go right back into where you were. And that'll keep the seam where, your start and your end is per row for each row. And that makes it so much easier. I kid you not. Like, it makes it sit perfectly flat and not a problem and all of this. All right, so we chain 2, and let's start with 1, 2, 3. We're on row 3. So let's work it. No, we're not. 1, 2, 3. We're on row 4. All right, so you'll go back in and you'll do your 2 double crochets for the start of row 4. Chain 2, work a cluster in the first chain space. Chain 2. Now you have another chain space here. Chain 2, and we'll work our corner here. So that's my first cluster, chain 2, and I'll work my second cluster. And you really, let's see, okay, so the seam thing I covered, and then really it's paying attention to make sure that you work your corners as a corner, if I didn't say that already, because that was another thing. Like, I would stop paying attention and I would just do double crochet, and I would stop working the corner as a corner. So I'd have like one rounded edge or something silly, and I'd have to pull out a whole, I'd have to pull out a full row or something. And that's annoying too. All right, so we did our corner, chain 2, and we'll work our next cluster here in our chain 2 space from the previous row. So I know I'm moving fast, but I'm just trying to keep this flowing where I don't have to crop it, split the film and do time lapse and all that. I'm really trying to, walk you through. So you'll chain 2, you'll work your next cluster of double crochets. And now we're at our corner again. So chain 2, and we'll work our 2 clusters. Chain 2, and go right back in and work your second cluster for that corner. My cone just took a dive off. My cone just took a dive off the chair. All right, we did our second corner so far. Chain 2 from our second corner, and work your first cluster on this side. Chain 2, work our next cluster in our chain space. Okay, now we're going to chain 2 and work our corner. I feel like very linty here. Okay, so we'll work our first cluster from this corner. Chain 2, work your second cluster. Chain 2, move over to your next chain space here and work 1 cluster. Chain 2, next cluster, next chain space. Chain 2, and we'll work our last part of this corner. Chain 2, slip stitch, chain 2, 1, 2, and we're going to go right back in, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're working row 5 now. Alright, so we're right back in, and we're going to work our first cluster, or 2 double crochets to complete our cluster. Alright, now you'll chain 2, and you'll skip over to your next chain space and work a cluster. So I always say I love this with the granny squares, because when you first start, a row takes no time at all, right? Because it's, what, 8 double crochet? 2, 4, 6, no, 12 double crochet for a first row. It's like 12 double crochet on a first row. And then by the time you get a super big granny square, not this, we're not going that big with this, but when you get a super big granny square, oh my gosh, the rows take forever. Totally forever. I'm going to zoom out a little. Okay, so I'm going to start working my clusters here. Chain 2, move over to your next cluster. Chain 2, and now we're working a corner. So our first cluster for this corner, chain 2, and go right back in and finish working your corner here. Chain 2, now we're working regular, 1 cluster in each till we get to our corner. Chain 2, next chain space, next cluster, right? Chain 2, scoot over again. Chain 2, working our corner now with our first cluster. Chain 2, right back in that same spot and work another cluster. That's our corner, so we'll chain 2 and move over again. I hope you're getting the hang of this. They're not as complicated. You know, they look pretty complicated, I think, when you see them sometimes. So when you see certain crochet patterns and stitches and stuff like that, and especially if you're a beginner. But really, you know, it just takes a little time and practice. I always think that. And I also think with every new project that it makes you better for the next project, you know? And like, you know, everybody was a beginner at one time. So don't get discouraged. I mean, if you don't like crochet, you don't like crochet. That's, you know, the long and short of it. But don't get discouraged. It is a nice hobby. People make it into a business. And, you know, And people like me do patterns, you know, or make, you know, stuff on a whim. Okay, so chain 2, move over to your next chain space, working cluster, and then we're going to work this corner here, so you'll chain 2 and do your first cluster. So really, if you need to pause or rewatch or, you know, at any point, go back in and do your second cluster for this corner. Chain 2, and we're moving on. Work our first cluster here. Chain 2, next cluster and chain space. Chain 2. So I think we have one more row after this. Work your next cluster, and then I'm almost at my corner here. Chain 2, and I'm going to finish up my corner here from the beginning of the row. So one cluster, a chain 2, and then a slip stitch. And a chain 2. 1, 2. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is our last row for this piece. Whoops. My yarn is caught my yarn up on my strap adjusters. Okay, so we'll work this one last row, and then we're going to put a border on this of single crochet. So this is, I had filmed this already, and then I realized that I needed to do a whole bunch of voiceover because apparently it was a busy day that day, and there was things happening. And all right, let's work our last row. All right, so you'll do your 2 double crochets to complete this first cluster, and we're on row 6 now. You'll chain 2, you'll move over and work your first cluster. Chain 2, move over and work your next cluster. Chain 2, next cluster in the chain space, next chain space. Chain 2, moving over. We're almost at our corner here. Chain 2, and let's work our corner here. First cluster, chain 2, second cluster in that same space, chain 2, and we're moving over to work the rest of the row here. So, I mean, they go quick when you get going, these granny squares. Like, you know, we're already on row 6, and I've been filming for almost a half hour or so. And then I'm, you know, I'm also moving a little slower, but that's okay. All right. Chain 2, move to your next chain space, do your cluster. Chain 2, next chain space, 1 cluster. Chain 2. And if you've got the hang of it and you're finished and all, you could just move on to the border and, you know, fast forward and get to the border part of this. So chain 2, we're going to work our corner here. So first cluster, chain 2, second cluster, chain 2, and then we'll move on to the regular here. So first chain space is a cluster, chain 2, next chain space, I love these cones, but I always think they need to, there's so much yarn on them, you know. It takes so long to use them up. You know. Chain 2, next chain space. Working our clusters. Chain 2, last cluster before our corner here. Okay, now we're going to work a corner, so we're going to chain 2 and work our first cluster in that chain space. Chain 2, work our second cluster for this corner. Chain 2. And we're moving on to our regular clusters. One cluster in each of the chain spaces. Chain 2, scoot over, next cluster. Chain 2, scoot over to the next chain space. Chain 2, next chain space here. Chain 2, and we're going to work our last, and then we're going to cut off. I got a knot, I'm sorry. I made it to the very end and then I got a knot in my yarn. Yes, go me. Alright, last cluster to finish up this corner and this row. Row 6, okay? So chain 2 and then slip stitch. And you'll pull a tail for weaving, or however you do. You know, some people cut right off. You know, I don't do that. I don't even understand how that works. I weave in and do other weird things here. Okay, so you're going to snip off. We're going to change colors. Hopefully you're changing colors. So leave yourself a little bit of a tail to weave in. You know, do that on a yarn needle. I used to weave in with a crochet hook, a smaller crochet hook, and I would try and get it all, and then I realized that I was jacking up my stitches without using from not using a yarn needle, because the yarn needle will slip right through, beep beep boo, you know. But when you're over here trying to get it to go underneath and pull through and everything, a lot of times you'll jack your stuff up. All right, you'll mess it up. You don't want to do that. Okay, you will make 2 of these. We are going to mark the front of our panel, which is the side of the panel that is facing you. We worked in the round. All right, so these are perfect for that. All right. So front, just any stitch will do ya. Just make sure it's the front, and sometimes these things will spin to the other side, so watch how you clip it in. All right, here, this is our starting. I told you to work around your tail. Nice and tight, pulls everything tight. With either a yarn needle, or, you know, you can make a tiny little knot right here. I do this all the time. I do this with my hats, my amigurumis. Anytime I'm working in the round, I do this. Okay, I've never seen one of my knots come out, but that's not to say they couldn't come out. That's just to say I've never seen one of my knots come out. And I sell, I donate, I give gifts and all that kind of thing. So, and you know, toys and stuff like that. All right, so that's just saying that. All right, so we worked around our tail. So you can make a little knot as tight as you can to the stitches. All right, tiny little knot. Now what's going to happen is over time that'll blend in. And the whole point of working around your stitches, it saves in weaving in, and it closes up that loop, And then you could do something silly like make a little knot and snip off. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, because you do you and I do me, you can take a yarn needle, of which I do not have one out for some reason. Okay, you could take a yarn needle. A tapestry needle works great with most yarns. Not super thick yarns, you're not going to get the yarn, you know, super thick yarn, you're not going to get it through there. But here's a plastic one. Here's a darning needle. Darning needles are my new favorite because they're bent and they're perfect. Oh my gosh. I feel like where have you been all my life with these darning needles? I'm so glad I ordered them. All right, a yarn needle, tapestry needle. This is a steel metal one. This is more of a tapestry needle. It's smaller, but it has a long eye, so you could squish the yarn down and push it through. Okay, with that being said, if you're uncomfortable making the knot, you thread it on the yarn needle and you go right at the base and you just go around a couple of times and snip off, and it'll stay in there. Maybe the end will come out here and there, you know, but you could snip that off because you already know you worked around your end and this and that. And also we're going to line this, you're not going to see it. All right, so not a big deal. For the most part, it's not a big deal. Okay, depending on, you know, if you get nervous about it, no worries. Promise it'll work out. All right, so snip off, get rid of that. All right, let's see. Zoomed out. Now from here, we're going to put a border on this. And the color that you choose for your border, you're going to make the sides and the bottom of the bag with that color. Okay, that's how that's going to work out. So I was going to go with the black because I have a black strap. I have black nylon, I have white nylon strapping, but this is a spring bag. I think I'm going to go with the blue, even though my strap adjusters are black. I think I'll go with the blue, because even if I go with the black, black cotton is not the same color as black nylon, nor is it the same color as two pieces of plastic. Okay? So as much as, you know, you ever throw on black pants or something and a black shirt and like your shirt's faded, and I'm just like, oh gosh. I do that all the time and I'm like, why is my shirt so faded, you know? What happened here? Stuff just doesn't, like, it looks fabulous when you first buy it, then you wash it and it gets all faded. Oh, I hate that. Okay, that's like one of those annoying things, right? Annoying life things. All right. So we're going to do a border. You're going to attach in pretty much any corner will do you. It does not have to be the corner that we were working in, okay? So you'll make 2 of these and then you'll do this. All right, in the corner, put your hook through. Take up whatever color you're going to use. Leave yourself a little tail so you have something to grab onto. All right, you're just going to pull through. And with that, let me zoom in just in case. And with that, you'll just chain. So you'll chain 1 and you'll go right back in and you'll do a single crochet. All right, so you'll work a single crochet around, and I'll show you what we're going to do here. Okay, so it's 1. Now I don't have a count for this. This usually comes out to like 100 and between 104 and like 110 single crochets, something like that. But I don't have an exact count because every time I get to the very end, I lose my count on this usually. I don't know why. All right, but we'll single crochet. So you're going to go right in to the top of your stitches. You can work around the tail a little bit, and then that saves on weaving in later on also, because that's what we like. All right. And you're going to go right in, and now here's your chain space. So you'll do 1 single crochet in the chain space, and here is where the chain space attaches to the double crochet, so you'll go right in the top of there. Now you want to be careful with this, sometimes when you change stitches from a big looser stitch to a smaller tighter stitch, it can cinch it up, it can make it not lay flat and things like that. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so you'll continue on with this, and I'll get you to the first corner, and then I'll meet you at the end because I already walked you through the other, so not a big deal. All right, ooh, wait, a single crochet. If I didn't say, I didn't say. All right, working along, a single crochet. You go in, you yarn over, pull through. You have 2, yarn over again, and pull through both. And that's a single crochet. So go in, pull up a loop, you yarn over, pull up a loop. You have 2 on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2. If I didn't say, I'm sorry. All right, and you'll work this, and I'll get you to the first corner. Even tension, as even as possible. Okay, and I have a tendency, like, I'll pull it to make sure it's gonna like lay flat. I don't know why. I just always do that. It's one of those weird habits, I guess. All right, and I'll get you to the first corner, and I'll show you how we'll do, and then I'll meet you back. All right. Now I'm at my first corner. So for this, we're not doing all of that. We're doing 2 crochets in the corner. 1, 2. A chain 2. A chain 2. And go right back in and do 2 crochets. And with that, you're going to skip this very first one. That very first one, because it's a pain in the neck to pick up. And you'll just scoot over, and you'll work like this for the rest of the row, doing your border, and then we'll slip stitch and cut off. All right, but I'm going to leave you here for a few minutes. You can pause here if you're working it along with me until you finish your edge. But I'm going to shut on the camera and fast forward, and then I'll meet you at your edge, or my edge, or the edge. The end of this row is what I'm trying to get at, where I'm going to meet you. Now I'm at the end here. I just was finishing up. All right, so I did the border all the way around. So in the last one, where the chain space is, where we started, so 2 single crochets, a chain 2, and a slip stitch. And then for this, you'll pull a tail and cut off. All right, and then you'll work your next panel exactly the same that we worked the first one. All right, so from here, we're going to make our sides and the bottom of our bag in the same color that we worked our border in. All right, I do not have an exact stitch count, and that's okay. Not stitch count, row count rather. Well, same difference, right? Okay, so anyway, you'll put your panels aside. All right, what you need to do is you will chain 6. So you could do that with a slip knot. You'll chain 6 and you'll work single crochet. All right, so we just did the single crochet. So you'll do your slip knot if that's how you start. Okay, and you'll chain 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You'll skip this first one on the hook, closest to the hook, and you'll work back in a single crochet for each chain. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. All right, you'll chain 1, turn your work, and you'll go in through both sides of the braid. So you'll skip that chain, you'll go in and work 1 single crochet across the row in both sides of the chain. All right, both sides of the braid. So, 3, 4, 5. Now super easy. We're gonna line the bag either way. But when the single crochet has less stretch and less like give and stuff like that, it'll retain its shape better. All right, and then it also makes it easier to use the strap adjusters on the sides. So what you want to do, starting, you're only going to make this if you're going to do the bag exactly how I did it, with exactly how I did it, I'm doing it, whatever, with the nylon strapping and the strap adjusters. Okay, you're going to make this, you can measure your piece, and it should be 8.5 inches, including the border, something like that. Approximately, I have just over 8. Okay, so now this is squared, right? This is squared, it's even. So you need to make it to fit the 24 inches. That is the sides and the bottom. Okay? And then you need some overhang or hangover. Same difference. All right? So you want to make this approximately, I'm going to go with about 30 inches. Let's say. So here, you would scoot that over an inch. So that's an, no, I got it scooted over 2 inches. So 2 inches. And straight down. And this is the importance of the measuring tape, especially on this one, because we are doing it to fit specific. I'm not giving you a row count or anything like that. So for this, you definitely want it 26 to 27 inches. Okay, and if it's, don't worry about it, it'll stretch, and we're gonna attach it, and then it'll stretch a little and, adjust and all that. Okay, so you'll make your 2 panels, and you'll make your sides and the bottom of your bag with the single crochet, 5 single crochets across, a chain 1 at the end. And you'll measure. So you'll go along, la 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 la, and when you get to 26 inches, no, what did I say, 27 or 26? Okay, 26 or 27 inches, you'll stop, okay? And then you will come back and you will look for part 2 of this video. And the reason I'm doing in part 2 is because I walked you through the whole first part. So I don't want to eat up all your time, So once your pieces are done, because it's going to take you time to do the first and second piece and then make that and all of this. All right. And then if you didn't have all your supplies and you needed to get that. So I don't like doing 2 parts when it comes to these videos because nobody ever comes back for the second part. But I'll put the link below as soon as I post. And for the second part, when I post that, I'll put the link below. And if you want to try the advanced pattern, similar but different, simple, like not simple, but little differences and stuff like that. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. If you do attempt to make this, or even if you just figure out something easier with doing a granny square, give me a thumbs up. Comment questions below. What else? As always, happy hooking, because it keeps you off the streets, keeps you out of trouble, and keeps you in your boho bags, looking super cool to all your friends and stuff. I do have the website up. I don't know how much longer it's going to be up, but you could check my links below if it's still there. I have other patterns. If you're into the granny squares, you figured it out, and now you are granny square crazy. I have granny square other patterns, granny rectangles, sun hats with the granny square stitch. All right, so check those out, and I will be back super soon with the second part of this video, and in that I'll show you how to attach everything, how we'll do the lining, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much for watching Crochet Basics K. Jolie Beginner Boho Purse. Have a super great day. Thank you so much.